everyone, and welcome to our Monday FOA Live. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, and are really excited about today's show. Jennifer Catrulia, co-president of Family Office Association, and of course joined by Rush Olney. Rush, good afternoon to you today.
Good afternoon, Jennifer. How are you?
Doing very, very well, thank you. It's great to jump into a Monday. I can share, and I'll apologize to anyone who's not in this camp. I think I can speak for Rush as well, where we're pretty excited about the football outcome from yesterday and the road ahead to the Super Bowl. Certainly a couple of Chiefs fans here. So, but exciting games yesterday. So a lot of fun, and now headed for the big game.
Yep, and to everybody who has tuned in for FO Live, thank you. And I just want to say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're calling in or dialing in from. We have an exciting guest. You probably are ready for a change on our side, as we've done a lot of housekeeping over the last 3 or 4 weeks and around the holidays. So today, I'll let Jennifer do the introduction, but very excited for our guest today.
So we will be welcoming to the show very shortly David Teten. And so David actually has a long time relationship with Family Office Association and a great friend of FOA. Rush and I now are having the opportunity to meet him more recently, but really excited about today's conversation. And so David actually is a venture partner with Coolwater Capital. He's got a long history working with family offices and in VC. And so he's actually got a number of things we'll share with all of you, including some great follow-ups. So really looking forward to bringing David to the show in a moment. In the meantime, we do have a little bit of housekeeping this week. We'll keep it light. For those of you in the Northeast or New York City area, just a reminder, we do have an FOA happy hour this Friday. It is either at or very, very near capacity. We have gone through the list a little bit. I know we've reached out to some of you with some questions, just as we continue to really make this a member event. And so if you've received any messages from us, just clarifying RSVPs, things like that, please make sure you respond. We want to make sure we help you register and enjoy your afternoon. Number of people traveling in for this one, so it'll be fun. And I know, Rush, we won't see you at this one, but I know we'll be seeing you at several events coming up. Rush was kind enough to offer to travel in, but we've got a number of things coming up, so we had to be careful with the calendar. But Rush, we'll be seeing you soon.
I look forward to seeing everybody. Thank you.
Which is awesome. And we will be ramping up actually aggressively for the kickoff of our first masterclass together, at least for Rush and I. We're doing this with all of you. March 11th is going to be the first day of our next masterclass. So you'll see a number of announcements about that, but really, really looking forward to having those conversations over a 9-day period with certainly our current members and community and those of you who are meeting along the way. We have some wonderful new resource council members we'll be sharing with everyone. And we continue to evolve the new membership site. So for the private events that are coming up and a number of cool announcements, if you have not already accepted your invitations to the member site, or if you're interested in learning more, please let us know and we'll be happy to help. We are really excited again to continue to build the community, not only through the live events, but through the virtual community as well. So Rush, if you have anything else, we'll make the announcements. Otherwise, we'll invite David in.
I'm just ready. I'm excited to start the combo. So
excellent. All right. So Chloe, if we can bring David in, we'll kick off the conversation. Hi there, David. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you for having both of us, my landline and myself.
Absolutely.
Your avatar.
The beauty of technology, it works until it doesn't. So David, thanks for your patience as we work out some sound glitches here. Sometimes we have to go through it. David, we've given a very, very brief intro about you, your history and friendship with FOA, certainly current involvement in company, but would love to just learn a little bit more about you, your background, and have you jump in.
Sure. So brief background, originally from California. I was an investment banker and a strategy consultant, and then a serial entrepreneur. I built 3 companies, sold 2. And then I became a serial builder of investment organizations. I founded Harvard Business School Angels of New York, which is now the biggest angel group on the East Coast. All Harvard alumni, although we invest blind to school affiliation. If anything, there's a bias against the Harvard grads because of the ego issues. And then I joined FF Venture Capital when it was just getting off the ground. Started by a Goldman Sachs executive. I came in as the first outside partner. I was there for 6 years. We grew dramatically during my tenure. Our 2013 fund is the top performing early stage VC in the country, according to Preqin data. And then I was recruited into Hoff Capital, another early stage VC based in New York, which was anchored by 3 prominent Egyptian business families. So I joined in New York as the first non-founding partner when it was still a very, very small organization, single-digit million AUM, and Hoff is today over 1.2 billion AUM with LPs from 37 countries. So over the years, I've worked with a lot of family offices. I've consulted to some. I've worked for firms that have been anchored by family offices. And over the years, I've developed a particular interest in investment technology, meaning anything that helps investors generate alpha and grow. And my view is family offices are replicating what we saw with hedge funds. 30 years ago, hedge funds were this fringe element of finance, right? It was considered very risky for your career to go work for these things called hedge funds. And they grew and they became a big part of finance. And there was a whole ecosystem of service providers that emerged and tech vendors that emerged to serve their needs. And I like to point out to my hedge fund friends that the wealthiest person in New York didn't make money by being an investor, right? Mike Bloomberg made money by selling picks and shovels to the rest of us. So I became very interested in the picks and shovels business to investors. And family offices are now going through that progression, right? They're becoming institutionalized. There's a whole industry now, which didn't really exist decades ago, of people who specialize and build their careers in being a COO, a CIO, or whatever of a family offices. They're in some cases competing with traditional banks for talent out of business schools or maybe a few years after business schools. And they have their own unique tech needs. So I'm an investor in a number of companies like Adipar, which provide tools and technologies to help high net worths and family offices manage their assets. And I think that's a great business to be in. So it's another large point of intersection between my world and FOA. So that's a little bit about my background.
Well, that's amazing. And obviously you have a lot going on and a lot you've been up to. Tell us a little bit more, if you don't mind, about what you're doing now, top priorities, what you're seeing.
So I'm with Coolwater Capital, and Coolwater is Y Combinator for emerging VCs. We run a large accelerator for young VC funds. We have graduated 185 funds, which collectively have raised $2 billion and have invested in over 5,000 companies. So we are indirectly one of the biggest tech accelerators in the world. We educate these VCs in how to build a franchise VC firm, how to graduate from a rich person with a checkbook to a real firm, right? Which will outlast you, a generational firm. And we invest in them as, depending on the circumstances, as a limited partner into the general partnership of the vehicle and or the management company of these funds. So I just joined a few months ago, but very excited about what we're building. And because of the unique nature of our ecosystem, we have our hands into every part of the innovation economy. We've got 11 VCs who specialize in climate crisis. We've got a bunch of VCs who focus on fintech. We've got VC focus on healthcare, right? Because the universe of VC innovation is so vast, and VCs by their job are on top of innovation. So I run a community called pevctech.com focused on helping investors use technology and analytics more rigorously to generate alpha. My view is the old school family office was a retired individual sitting there with Excel. And literally, I remember a certain wealthy person who literally showed me his Excel spreadsheet with the different rows, said, I'm worth $100 million, actually $105.3 million. And here's all my real estate properties. He was an older gentleman, different generation. And, it's fine. It worked for him. He's a wealthy guy, but I would not call that best in class practice, right? So at PVC Tech, we think that the next generation of sophisticated high net worths, and not to mention private equity funds and VC funds, they're going to use data and analytics in a much more rigorous way. In the same way, in the public markets, you've seen the emergence of hedge funds like Two Sigma, D. Shaw, that look more like software companies than like a person with an Excel spreadsheet, right? Doing stuff by hand. The other community I manage that intersects with FOA is called Founders Next Move. We run events and publish resources to help tech founders in transition. It came out of my own life experience where I saw I was off the regular labor market path where you work up the ladder at some large organizations. And I had different sort of options open to me. So I compiled resources on what do you do next, right? Do you start another company? Do you become a VC? Do you become an angel? Do you sit on boards? And my goal there is to try and circle around us talent whom we might back in their next VC fund, who might co-invest with us. These are high value added people who are valuable allies to have on our side.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So some of it's very poignant. Some of the questions, or a lot of the questions we receive when we are having lunches, sit downs face to face with the family offices are, excuse me, how to invest in tech, or even more to the point, how to invest in an asset class that's outside of the scope of what business or what asset class really paved the way for the family office, be that 3 generations ago to whatever it may be. So what options do they have, and what avenues and paths do they have to kind of make those investments and find information for making those investments?
The first thing I would evaluate is, what is your core competency, right? You might be an expert in real estate, right? You know a lot more about it than I do, and go make a lot of direct investments in real estate. If you want to get into tech investing, you can recruit people in-house who have that expertise, or you can outsource to funds. But what you don't want to do is just dive in and think that you're going to do well just because you made money in real estate, which is a completely different industry, right? So you have to know your limitations. I know mine, right? Which is why I invest in index funds for some of my assets, because I don't have experience as a public stock markets picker at any scale. So I'll let other people do that, or I'll trust the markets. So there are a couple of major ways in which I suggest family offices think about investing in tech, and I'll scale it from easy to more difficult. The easier approach is you invest in fund of funds or funds, right? And you're a limited partner, let them do the work. And then you just do your due diligence that they are a competent fiduciary. Not just they know how to invest, but they know how to be a fiduciary and build a real investment management firm, which is not the same thing. That's actually part of the genesis of Coolwater Capital. The typical person who founds a VC, they might have had success as a serial tech founder. They might have had success as a rising product manager at Google. That's great, it's relevant, but it's not the same thing as being CEO of a fund management company, which is what you are when you start a VC, right? So we provide them with the infrastructure to do that. Another path is to invest via syndicates, particularly via some of the online investing platforms. 10 East, for example, which is a sponsor of my blog, or Republic, which I'm an investor in, which in different ways provide you a curated set of direct investing opportunities and give you more control, because you can choose exactly which entity you're putting money into, as opposed to fund, right, where you're investing in a black box. And then the third is to start looking to invest directly, which typically I'd say you should have someone who, at least that is the major part of their job, right? So because in the VC ecosystem, there's a hierarchy, right, of who you want in your deals. So from the point of view of me as a VC, or from the CEO, what they really want is someone who's super value added for their company. So if you're a real estate person and it's a company that's in prop tech, then you might get the first call. If it's a life sciences company, you are probably not going to get the first call. You're going to get the call after all these smarter people who know more about life sciences have turned the deal down. And so you should be a little concerned about that deal. So I think having someone who's plugged in the ecosystem and knows how to filter is valuable. And that's why I like platforms where there's an alignment of interest, because the people on them are putting in their own money. So that's a model that you'll often see in some of the platforms like 10 East and Republic, in certain deals where they'll publicly advertise, right, that they, as a deal sponsor, put their own money in.
Real quick. So if company, or if family offices are wanting to direct or wanting to invest directly, so they're not wanting to take that, I guess, measure of doing a fund of funds, what would be a good way for them to find relationships with investing directly without leading rounds or without having to sort of take up the mantle that a VC or private equity firm typically would take.
So I want to draw an analogy to public markets, right? There's a lot of academic research showing that the typical investor should not invest directly into the stock market. You should invest through a mutual fund, a hedge fund, through a professional, right? Unless you yourself are an expert in public market picking. And yet there's a whole vast industry of companies that will gladly take your money when you want to go, short IBM or whatever your trade is. So why do people do it? Because they want the control, right? They think they're smarter than the market. So the same point applies in the private markets, but the more so because it's less regulated, right? It's less transparent. So I think for many people, they shouldn't invest directly, but a lot of people want to invest directly. Okay, so let's talk about how to do it. So the first thing I would do is try and stay within your zone of competency. So same with our real estate example, go to the prop tech conferences, maybe invest in a prop tech meaning property tech, in a couple of VC funds that are focused on real estate tech, and say to them, I want to invest directly. If you invite me into your deals, I'll consider that an averaging down of the fees I'm paying you, right? So that makes you more attractive. And you will be hopefully seen as value added in those particular transactions, right? You can start to, and this all requires investment time and energy, but you can start to sign up for the conferences that focus on the space. You can buy some of the commercial databases that track early stage companies in the space. There are generalist databases like CB Insights, and then there are sort of niche databases that track just startups in a particular geography or industry, and use that to get you deeper into that. But the absolute worst way to invest, and I see people do this all the time, is, oh, my buddy, the retired doctor, whatever, is investing in this deal and invited me in this deal, and he's a smart guy, so I'm going to invest, right? So unless it's a healthcare deal, right, the fact that your buddy's investing is just not a good endorsement, because you're basically trusting your buddy to have done the due diligence, and your buddy may or may not be qualified to assess it. The fact that you're friends does not indicate that they're smart. I have friends who are, wonderful people, but they're not so smart about investing. They're smart about something, which is hopefully correlates with me being friends with them. So that's something to stay away from.
Great. And so I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and then Rush, if we can hop back, I think. But so for investors in private companies, we talk a lot about being able to measure and manage for success. And so how can these investors in private companies use tech and analytics, to generate alpha? How does that work?
So that's a long conversation. The first thing I would say is when I bring up this topic, I find most people think about origination. In the public markets world, if you look at the technology budget of a D Shaw, most of that is spent on what I would call origination. They would call it trade selection and trade weighting, things like that. In my world, there are 11 steps of how you invest in a private company, right? You got to get the capital together if you're not just investing your own money. You got to source the deal, due diligence the deal. You got to execute the deal. You got to manage the company over time and your investment in it. You have to exit it over time, and so on. And at each stage, there are ways to use technology to do it more or less effectively. So for those interested, I've published a detailed white paper on different vendors that are hitting each of those stages. I'll just highlight a couple of best practices. The first is to know what the heck you own, which is harder than you might think. That was part of the genesis of Adipar, is Joe Lonsdale, the founder, who has spoken to some FOA events with me. He had earned a lot of money by his late 20s and started to set up a family office. And he realized that the typical family office runs in Excel, right? And that's particularly bad because the typical family office has a lot of off-the-run assets, right? They have a farm, they've got a boat, they've got 2 properties, they've got shares in some private companies where maybe they made their wealth. It's not just a bunch of public stocks. And each of those things have different risk parameters, and a thoughtful financial manager should take that into account, right? So if you own a bunch of shares of a private company because you were CEO of that company, you probably should not put a bunch of your liquid assets into the S&P, right? Because you really don't have diversification there because so much of the S&P is now tech. So I would make sure that you may not hold all your assets in one place because the typical high net worth gets nervous, right, about that. but you certainly should track all your assets in one place in some automated fashion where you're pulling in the data, and then thoughtfully look at it and say, have we appropriately reflected the fact that I have a bunch of theoretically property in Miami, right? And there's exposure to storm risk there. So what does it imply for the total portfolio if I appropriately insured myself? Those are the sort of things that you have to think about holistically across your whole portfolio, maybe your kids and other associated entities. In terms of investing in private companies, so I find most people rely way too much on their social network. They think they get the best deals through their friends. And that is a huge error because you're hopefully not picking your friends, as we referenced earlier, because of their acumen in picking deals for you. I mean, great, but that's a pretty homogenous group of friends, and they may not be the people who you also want to be your godparent at your kid's birth. So one of the ways you get around that is, first of all, you build relationships with the people who are qualified, right? So that's why you invest in a prop tech VC, because those people are connected in prop tech and they can introduce you to deals in that space. And the different data vendors. If you go onto CD Insights or a like vendor and you search for all the prop tech companies in your geography, you now have a list of your investable universe, and maybe you should make a point of getting to know those companies. And that way you will more effectively identify the real winners. I have a friend at a well-known super quantitative VC. He said he and his database has identified several thousand companies that are platforms between doctors and patients, right? It's, particularly during COVID, it seemed like such an obvious business. And it is an obvious business. It does make sense. But do you think that just randomly, one of the several, out of the thousands and thousands of companies that are a Match.com for doctors and patients, the ones that are going to email you are one of the few winners? Probably not, right? You really need to go through all several thousand in some rigorous way, identify the ones that have the highest propensity to be the winner, right? Because it's going to have natural economies of scale. And that is the Match.com for doctors and patients that you want to put your money into.
Great. And so thank you very much, David. And I'm going to ask one more question, if you don't mind, and then we'll kick it back over to Rush. But you lead a research project on innovation and in the investment management industry. What prompted you to explore this space?
So the genesis of it was one of the most impactful books in innovation in the last 50 years is Clay Christensen, Innovator Dilemma. And in that book, I'll summarize it in a minute. He said that the pattern of disruptive companies is they typically do one job really well, but they don't do a good job on everything. So in technology, one of his examples was in the case of pocket home computers, right? The initial home computers were slow and clunky, and they didn't do very much, but you could play games in them, right? So that was one job. And at the time, the mainstream computing industry, meaning mainframes, they laughed at, these are toys, right? And then, of course, they grew up and personal computers became a big industry. Now, in turn, that's been disrupted by smartphones, one could argue. So in finance, I started to think, okay, how do I look at that from the lens of investment management? Who's disrupting investment management? And to me, the paradigmatic example is Vanguard, right? When they launched, people said, this is an idiotic idea. You're buying mediocrity, and that's like, who's going to be dumb enough to give money to an index fund and buy mediocrity? So that grew up, and now index funds are obviously a huge part of investment management. So I started studying what are the jobs to be done of an investment manager. And if you had asked me as a novice VC a decade ago, I would have said, well, alpha, right? My job is to generate alpha. But that is the wrong answer. There are about 24 jobs to be done of an investment manager, including alpha, but also asset preservation. Don't get me fired, right? So the allocator doesn't want to get fired for giving you money. That's have some excuse if you underperform. Exposure to educational opportunities, exposure to network opportunities. People will invest in deals because they want to build relationships with the other people on the cap table or the CEO. And risk management across other assets you may have, and so on and so on. And so I started studying the companies that were hitting some of these jobs really well in a very targeted way, because I said, that's the vanguard of the future, right? Those are the companies that are going to grow up and disrupt the established Morgan Stanleys and JP Morgans and the other big incumbents in the investment management ecosystem, and the hedge funds and mutual funds and so on, and Vanguard itself, of course. And so it's really, that was part of my own origination process, was to systematically identify those companies, because according to Professor Christensen's research, that is predictive of the companies that are going to be the real winners of the future.
And I guess along the same vein is you described asset management, or the asset management industry, as baffling. What can you expand on that a little bit for us?
So the investment management industry is a peculiar industry by the standards of most other industries. So one is that the whole premise of the investment management industry, right? Almost everyone is promising you some alpha, but in practice, it's mathematically impossible for all of them to deliver alpha above the index, right? Because the index, of course, is the average return. So by contrast, most restaurants will give you food, right? Like there's almost no such thing as a restaurant that fails to give you food, because they will be out of business real fast. And so to me, that's bizarre, and yet it continues, right? And people continue to pay for something that doesn't produce what the heck they actually originally paid for. So another irony of the industry is the homogeneity of the industry. If you look at who's leading the businesses, and that contrasts with the diversity of the wealth owners, right? I know you know the research about much more of the wealth in America is going to women, right? As they start inheriting their baby boomer husbands, and not to mention women who have made money in their own right. So there's a real disconnect there, and I certainly heard from many women or underrepresented minorities who say, "Gee, this seems like a disconnect." And I know that's become politically controversial, but certainly my wife will attest that she feels like there's a disconnect between the people who are propositioning, say, manage our money, and the background, the values that she and other people like her might bring to the table. So there's certainly some. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and I guess to the point as well, is at a certain scale, alpha becomes significantly more difficult as well. So
sure.
with the larger asset managers, while over the last 40 years they have they have something to hang their hat on, so to speak. At a certain scale, deploying more and more capital into the market also ends up being a detriment to alpha.
Yes. And in the restaurant industry, I mean, you could argue there's some negative diseconomies of scale, but I don't think they're anywhere near as severe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so what, I guess, with all the macro trends that are currently going on in the polar shifts, not just with finance, but social unrest, both local and global, what do you think, what factors have the biggest effect on the investment management industry as a whole?
So certainly I think post-COVID, post-Ukraine war, post-Hamas-Israel war, were people aware of tail risks that they historically might not have paid as much attention to. That's my safest prediction, right, is there'll be some unpleasant surprises. I don't know which they'll be, but there will be unpleasant surprises in 2024. And so I think people are paying a little more attention to how do they mitigate that by having a home in a different country. I spoke with someone who says he and his wife are trying to get citizenship in countries that hate one another. Because you figure if the country they're in now gets destabilized, just go to Russia, which doesn't like the U.S., and they probably can't. They'll have some protection.
You'll at least have a different view,
different set of problems. Yes.
Yes.
And Russia has its own issues. But I hear the logic of it. He may also worry about extradition, but hopefully most of our audience is not worried about extradition.
Well, I think, David, if you don't mind, what we'd love to do is the half hour always goes so quickly, but I think that's a great topic to end with, because over the next several months, if you don't mind, we'd love to invite you back, see how the trends continue, especially during what's going to be obviously a pretty volatile year. And so excited to have you back if you'll join us and continue to chart the course.
Happy to. Thank you so much for including me.
All right, thank you, David.
Pleasure.
And thank everybody else
for
chiming in and dialing in, and we appreciate you and look forward to the week ahead and next Monday's FOA Live.
We'll see
Take care.
everyone soon. Thank you.
Thanks,
Take care,
guys.
everyone.
Have a good week.